Hello there and welcome to the 9th edition of Career Stories Live. So I'm really pleased to have Trevor Merriden join me today. Welcome, Trevor. Thank you for coming on.
Hi there. Honoured to be on your show. Can't wait to get started.
Thank you. So as always, to anyone that's watching either now or on the replay later on, please do comment to let us know that you're here, where you're joining from, and please do feel free to ask any questions or share your experience in the comments. So Trevor and I have been colleagues at 1080 for a fair few years now, and he's been a guest on a number of my shows in the past about self-employment particularly. So these particular lives are all about careers, really. So it's what people do, why they do them, and hopefully the idea is to get people to give a bit of advice to those watching. So we'll get started with Trevor. So in his pre-session notes, he said to me that he seemed destined to be a yen trader, a scuba diving instructor, and an editor at a national sports newspaper, and he could have ended up anywhere. So very interesting. So Trevor, do you want to just start by doing a brief intro into you and what it is you're doing right now?
Yeah, I mean, I should stress I'm none of those things, and, but there were moments in careers where I could have ended up in that place, and it's interesting, why I sort of, I mentor folk, as you sort of mentioned at the start. There is I take a lot of interest in seeing how careers develop, as well as my own business, which is Merriden Media, which is a content specialist, content and PR specialist, particularly in the business to business and HR space. And I did that through, first of all, being, way back when I was an economist, and I'll get to the yen trade a bit in a minute. And then I became an economic journalist, and then a business journalist, and then more of a business journalist, editor. And then I went into PR, and I helped to run a PR business for a while. And then I set up my own business, this business, and which was between the worlds of journalism and PR. And I've been doing that for about the last sort of 10 or 11 years. And of course, coaching sort of folk along, once I've been doing it for a while, I thought, well, I must be doing something right. So I started to help people in terms of the development of their business and their careers as well.
Excellent, thank you. Lots to talk about there. So I've just seen Jeff's popped in to say hello. He can't stay, he's prepping for a seminar this morning. So thank you, Jeff, and namaste. So he was on a couple of weeks ago, so he normally pops in most sessions. So thank you, Jeff. Okay, so you sort of just touched on this a little bit, Trevor, about how you started your career. So shall we go straight to the scuba diving instructor? What's that all about then?
Okay. Well, I decided early on that that in my first of all, like many people, I didn't know what degree to do when I was doing my A-levels, and I ended up doing an economics degree, economics with stats. So did the economics bit. I was quite numerate. So I was a sort of numbers nerd before I became a words nerd. But I went into the Bank of England as an economist. After about 3 or 4 years, though, of doing that, I started a bit of wanderlust in me, and I hadn't sort of taken the year out as many people do, and so on. And in the meantime, the Bank of England, where I'd sort of joined as an economist, had a scuba diving club, and so I, much to my surprise, and I learned to dive, and I went on holidays with them, and I made good friends through it. And then at the end of all that, after about 3 or 4 years, I went and dived in warm waters, having dived about 100 dives in the Channel, the English Channel, thinking that the heaven was the English Channel. And then I realized that it wasn't, and that there was this huge world of warmer waters. And so I was qualifying to be a sort of dive leader, and I was going to go on to become a sort of a proper diving instructor. And that was where I thought actually my real sort of passion lay. And I went to the point where I even went on an expedition out to Belize for 3 months, where I and sort of lots of other people were diving on the coral reefs. It was a conservation sort of expedition where we were sort of mapping out all the sort of keys around there, sort of all the plant life and the fish life and so on, so that we could then make a case to the Belizean government as to, over a period of time, about how the coral had degenerated or not, and so. But it was in my mind at that time, although I was still a banker at that point. I in my mind, what I really wanted to do was become a scuba diving instructor. I think what happened in the end was that I kind of sort of took a bigger calling, if you like, in that I realized that although I loved it, I think I loved it as a hobby. And this is a sort of recurring thing in a couple of things I might talk about later, that there is often that you should always follow your passion, you're told. But also, when it's your passion, is it your passion because it's only your hobby, or is it a passion because it's your passion? You know, it's there's an important distinction there, I think. So so there I was diving, hundreds of dives, sort of, in lovely warm waters out in the Belizean sort of keys and so on. And I also dived out in sort of the Red Sea and things like that. And it was very serious. And to be honest with you, it was much more of a passion in my life than banking was at the time, much as I liked the people at the good old Bank of England.
Yeah, that's really true about the hobby versus making it into a career, isn't it? I know I'm a running coach, so I love running. But actually, like you've said, I realised fairly soon that I can't actually run to enjoy it anymore, because I'm running at other people's paces and I'm too tired to actually go out and do my own running now. So I don't do that anymore. I do the odd one every now and then. But yeah, I thought actually this side hustle is not going to become any more than an ad hoc thing for me. But you don't know until you try, do you?
No, and I think when I was diving for 3 months, and it was 2 or 3 dives a day, sort of going out and doing things, then it became a bit like a job, if you like. Even though I was surrounded by beautiful, pristine, lovely coral and things like that, eventually you get into a routine with some things, and I think part of the reason I ended up setting up a business and stuck at doing a business is that I like the variety, and I've always been restless, I think. And then when anything gets too routine based, then I kind of rebel a little bit against it.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, well, there are 2 things that scared me. First was economics, as I had to take economics A-level because it was the only thing that fit in, and the teacher told me right at the start I wasn't going to pass, which I didn't.
Okay, right.
I kind of think now, though, I mean, that's the thing, I think, at school, isn't it? And I don't know if it still happens as much, where you get forced into taking qualifications that really don't suit you.
Yeah. I think I was lucky, actually. I mean, I think so maths I loved, economics I loved. I took a degree in. Sorry, I wish I got that far in physics, but I took an A-level in physics, and physics was my odd one out, if you like, in that I had no particular aptitude for physics, but people had told me that was a very strong combination at the time. And to give you an example of my prowess in physics, was that I took a multiple choice test of 20 questions, 5 answers for each question, and I got 3 in a multiple choice test once. And my teacher said, I think we might need to move you down a set, Trevor, because because you could have randomly guessed and got more than that. I did recover in the physics and eventually sort of got a good enough grade to get into uni, but it was always my struggle. It was my equivalent of your economics, I think. So
okay, excellent. And the other thing was scuba diving. I've only done it once in a swimming pool, but that freaked me out enough. I knew that I didn't want to do it any further.
It's really weird, because I think a lot of people just imagine the pressure of the water on them, and they feel very claustrophobic. Where I found it the complete opposite. I think you go one of 2 ways when you've got a tank on your back underwater: is that you either feel it's claustrophobic, or you just feel like it's huge space there. And I was in the latter camp.
Oh, that's good. Okay, so the yen trader, do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, well, this was a weird one, because I kind of, so when I was working as an economist, you get, at that time, the bank were taking on a lot of people because they were losing a lot of people, because this was in the late 1980s, and there were a lot of sort of people, firms in the city that were offering sort of quite lucrative sort of things for people who wanted to leave, a place where the bank had given them a great training, and go and work in much more highly paid jobs in the city. And so I kept getting approached. I had been working as an international economist, and then I went onto the Japanese desk at the bank. Although I spoke no Japanese and I had no particular sort of special knowledge of Japan, I got some over the period of time. And I kept getting these approaches for whether I wanted to work as a yen analyst, work as a yen trader, and things like that. And I went, I don't know, you do, the important career lesson here for me was that was that money ain't everything, because I went through jumped through these hoops. I got approached by somebody who flattered me a bit, and I went to a first interview and a second interview and a third interview. Got all the usual kind of questions about why I wanted to join, and I told I'd researched the company, and I'd sort of came up with reasons, and then in the final interview, the guy said, so when so if you have a terrible day in the city and the yen's gone violently in one direction and you've lost a lot of money, would you care? And I said, no, I don't think I would. And then that he regarded that as a good answer,
right?
But I actually regarded it, and then I sort of repeated the answer to myself, and then back to him again. I said, "Do you know what? I really don't think I do care. Actually, I just don't care." And I left the interview room. I made it very clear that I didn't care, and to the point where I then went back and I phoned him back. What I said, I don't think I want to be a trader. Actually, I don't. It's that yes, there'll be lots of money. And some people get a thrill out of that, but I don't think I'm the kind of person who would get a thrill or a kick out of that. Experience the high of a great deal or the despair of a terrible deal or something like that. And I just thought, well, I don't want to spend my life rolling the dice and turning into what I saw some people who had got into that. It's very, very well paid, but incredibly stressed out. And I just didn't want to do that. So I opted for a different stressful career in journalism in the end. So.
Okay, so that takes us on to the newspaper editor.
Well, I mean, I was a magazine editor.
Right, okay.
I mean, I edited. Well, probably about 4 or 5 trade magazines. In terms of, sort of magazines like Management Today, an internet business .com boom and bust title that which went up and down with the whole .com boom bust, which is another story which I might tell if we get time. But then on to the areas that you and I got to know each other with in sort of HR and learning and so on. But no, this story is more about. I got this. I saw this ad in the paper to become a section editor of what was to be Britain's first sports daily national newspaper. Okay. The Mirror Group was going to start a sports daily national newspaper, and they bought a title which many people will be familiar with called the Racing Post. And actually decided to turn that title into an all sports daily newspaper, and they hired about 40 or 50 of the best sports journalists in the country, and me, who knew nothing about being a sports journalist, but I got hired, and that was a very strange experience, because on the day I was leaving Haymarket, which is where I'd been to that point as a journalist, I got a call, and the guy is a guy called John Mulholland, said who'd recruited me, said, "How are you doing, Trevor?" And I said, "It's fine." I said, "How are you doing, John?" He said, "Not so fine." I said, "What did you mean?" And he said, "Well, our chief executive has just been ousted, and it was his project, this sports daily national newspaper, and the project's on hold. And I just wanted to tell you that." And then I had a sort of very strange conversation with my boss, who I was about to leave, to tell him that the project was on hold. And he said, "Well, I can't do anything about it now, because we're having a leaving do in about 15 minutes." Yeah. And I decided that, because I'd been told I could come anyway and just see what happened, because it wasn't definitely cancelled. Yeah. And so I went. I spent 6 months producing these really strange dummy newspapers of this, what was a terrific newspaper in the making. But the trouble was, there was high politics going on in the Mirror Group at that time, and so there was me and about 40 or 50 sports, many of whom you might have heard of, people like Steve Bunce, who's now on the BBC as a sort of premium boxing commentator, sat opposite me, and I got to know all these sports journalists, because I thought I would love being a sports journalist. And it comes back to the thing I was saying earlier about the diving. is that when I was doing sports on a daily basis, and they were sending me out to events to report on things which went into this mock version of this newspaper. But at the end of the day, I was, after 6 months, we were all made redundant because there was no newspaper for us to launch. But I had a wonderful sort of training, but it also told me that I wanted to be a journalist, but actually I quite like the business side of things, and the sports again would be something that would remain a hobby and not become a sort of daily thing, because I didn't enjoy it quite as much as I had expected to. But so in a way, I was a section editor of a national newspaper that didn't launch. But then I went back to I got a call to go back to Haymarket, which is when I started editing a magazine called Internet Business, which is the .com thing that I mentioned before, and I'm going like that with my hand because it was like it was a complete bubble, so that well, the magazine just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and almost every time the amount of advertising you got depended on how quickly you could pick up the phone to make a deal, because everybody wanted to advertise. And as it was going up, this is a career lesson as well, by the way, that it was getting bigger and bigger and fatter, and more and more people were coming on board to help. And people were saying to me, "Trevor, you're the best editor ever because everything seems to work." And I started to believe my own publicity. Then the bubble burst, and it came right back down again. And people, and my publishers, were saying, "Trevor, you're terrible, because nothing you're doing seems to work at all, and it's all your fault." And it was basically the message I was getting. And so my kind of career lesson from that is never to believe the extremes of the good or bad about yourself, and to have faith in yourself. And I had enough faith in myself to realize that actually I'd done a pretty blooming good job holding a magazine together that was in terminal decline at that point. Anyway, they seemed to realize that enough themselves, because then they put me onto HR magazine where I was editing. So
excellent. Okay, so we've got Ali saying hi, and Alison has said, "How did you feel joining the company and then being told that the project had folded?"
Well, I felt terrible, Alison, and lovely to hear from you, by the way. And it was one of those ones, and I can't describe the awkwardness of the conversation I had with my soon-to-be ex-boss, who didn't want me to go, but felt that he couldn't really do anything to help me, and I wasn't asking him to do something, but I kind of wanted him to do something at that point. But it was so that was one form of awkwardness, and the other, and then I actually had a little holiday in between leaving one company and going to the next, where I went to Australia, and people were asking me, so how do you feel about this new project? And and I go, well, something's happened, and so and I was just explaining it, and so that became sort of awkward to sort of talk about it. And they were saying, "Well, you don't seem very enthusiastic." I go, "That's because I'm not sure if it's happening or not." And then when I arrived there, Alison, it was just surreal, that there was a project that certain people in the business were saying it could still happen, and then other people were saying it's definitely not going to happen. And it was just a tug of war. It was beyond my control. And the way I felt initially about it, in answer to your question, was not how I ended up feeling about it, because what happened was that I had a kind of project to work on in this mock dummy form, but no real responsibilities. And so I spent a lot more time doing what I hadn't done in my 20s, which was go out and go to lots of parties. And it was at one of those parties I met my future wife. So if that hadn't have happened, I wouldn't have met her. And we're still going strong 23 years later. So it actually worked out very well. So it was a mixture of emotions, in answer to question, Alison, but the initial feeling was one of supreme awkwardness. But then, as it happened, it all, from a life point of view, it turned out really well.
Yeah. Oh, that's really good. Okay, so did you want to talk about the HR journalism?
Yes. Was there a specific question?
No, just because you just mentioned it, that's where you ended up next. So.
Yeah. Well, okay, right. So when I just come off Internet Business magazine, I shell shocked by this kind of
Yeah.
sort of experience. It's like being in the lift at Euro Disney, that big fall thing that happens,
Oh,
and
yeah.
which is horrible. And then they said, well, actually, we think you've done quite well. You seem like a people person. Go on to this magazine. It's called HR Magazine. It's full of nice people. They're people. They're HR directors. You'll get on with them. You're a people person, aren't you? And I said, yeah. And I absolutely loved being on the magazine, because, like they said, it was all about an area that where really it was a genuine thing around development of people and getting the maximum out of everybody. And it opened my eyes in a way that up till then I'd been a sort of very cynical sort of journalist, who just kind of just process the stories, meet the deadlines, process the stories, and open my eyes out to something. In the end, the answer to your question is that I loved it so much because the subject matter was more interest to me than perhaps even sort of being a journalist was. That I actually thought, whatever I do, I want to stay in this subject area. And so I did that for about 4 or 5 years. We grew it quite a lot commercially. We started all sorts of initiatives about, HR 100 FTSE directors, the HR most influential rankings. And I was very proud of that period, if you like. And then you work on that for 4 or 5 years, and then you eventually think, well, what happens to people when they stop being editors? And I could have become a publisher, but there seem to be loads and loads of publishers in Haymarket already, too many, as it turned out, because they made quite a few of them redundant. Or I could go into a sort of similar field, and the field I chose was I specialised in the HR and people issues, but I worked for a PR business instead. I went over, so I was pitching back in to the magazines that I used to either run or was a rival to, and so that was what the dark side, sort of moving over to PR, and I did that for about 4 years, and we grew that business. From about 1 million to 3 million. I was a director of that business in about sort of 3 or 4 years. But I'd always had this hankering from round about the time I was starting to question whether I wanted to carry on being an editor. I thought I'd love to know how to run a business myself. I want to start something, and that's where Merriden Media, what I do, sort of came about. It's sort of halfway between the worlds of journalism, where you get a lot of writers who are good writers but not very good consultants, and people who work in PR who are great consultants, but the PR business at that time was struggling with what it was that it sold. Social media was changing things quite a lot.
Yeah.
But this world of content, where I was writing sort of hopefully high quality thought leadership papers, was the area that appealed, and I've sort of been there ever since. And I got my variety by working with lots of different types of clients.
Excellent. That all sounds really good. So that leads quite nicely, I think, on to the next question, which is about values. So lots of people have talked about their values when they're looking for work. So do you think your personal values have had an impact on the type of work you've taken on or not taken on, I guess?
Yeah, I when you start a business, I think you have certain fears which do affect your values, and that you think, well, I'm worried that I might fail in the business, for example, and therefore I'll take anything. I'll take any kind of work that's going, and that pretty soon bumps up against values. And I did it as a means to an end for about the first 6 months through a fear of failure. And then when I got beyond that, and I realized that actually this was not only self-sustaining, but this was a lot better, than what I had before, and that I had the freedom, variety. Then the values started to come in to their own. I decided, for example, that I'd be very true to my niche. So I wanted to work on high quality content, largely thought leadership work, which is those kind of, for those who maybe aren't from that background, it's all about position papers where you help a business position itself to raise its sort of profile above the rest of the market. And I thought that was what I wanted to do most of all. Another value I had was really around that quality side of things, that if people wanted to get me on the cheap, by sort of pushing down my rate. I wouldn't go down below a certain point. I'd rather turn down work
Yeah.
than take the wrong type of work, because if you don't do that, then you become a busy fool, if you like. You end up chasing lower and lower value work, and then the other value was about the management of my of being fair to my family and fair to my time. I'm not always the best at this, by the way, but I've always tried to make sure that the values that I have basically don't compromise, that I'm not sort of working all weekends or all evenings. And I do work too many hours, people will tell you, but I have started to sort of cut back sort of quite a lot. That eventually you have to. One of the things as a business owner is that you tend to take on responsibility for everything, and if you let it.
Yeah.
And so the value was to sort of kind of be kind to myself, if you like. In the process. Are those the sorts of values that you
absolutely.
mean?
And I think by you talking earlier about turning down the yen trader role, that kind of proves your value as well, isn't it? That actually you want to do something you do care about.
Yeah, I mean, a few people said I was an idiot for turning it down, to be honest with you, at the start.
From a financial perspective,
for a finance.
Yeah.
But I don't think I've spent a single second regretting that. I mean, it would have taken me down one route, and I might be retired, I might be dead by now. Sort of otherwise, because I might have stressed myself out so much. I don't think I would have been happy doing that. I wouldn't have cared, about the outcome of the work.
Yeah. Alison's saying being kind to yourself is essential, Trevor.
Yeah, totally. I'd say that's probably number one sort of learning, I think, is that very often I kind of, if I got to the end of the week and there was, when you're doing your own business, there's always something left to do. If you do run out of things to do, then there's something wrong, I think, because there's always something more to do, and you just have to I have this moment now where on a Friday afternoon, I don't quite crack open the champagne exactly, but I have a moment sort of late on a Friday afternoon where I kind of forgive myself, for the thing. I've tried my best. There are things I haven't done. There might be a lot to do on Monday, but I'm not going to spend any time at the weekend sort of thinking about it. And Alison, you're completely right about the kindness thing. You've got to be kind to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So have you got any advice for people who maybe want to start their career in journalism? Let's just pick on that one, or any of the other areas if you prefer.
Well, I'll start on journalism. I mean, when I was an economist, and I was trying to get into journalism, and I used my specialism. So number one, I'd say, is if you have a specialism of some sort, then that's a good way to start with journalism. Let's assume for the moment you don't have any journalistic training. I had zero journalistic training when I started. And so I moved over to the Economist group, and I wrote reports. So I was showing that I was writing, and it was about economics. So that was a sort of halfway house for about sort of 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And then, but even then, to get into what we call sort of mainstream journalism, I found really, really hard. And the best advice I could really give is that if it's something you really want to do, you keep knocking on doors and no one's answering, or no one's stopping and showing you. Is that you sometimes have to become a little bit sideways and tangential about how you show your skills. And I got lucky because a guy, I looked for magazines where the editors were not people who were traditional journalists themselves. Somehow, so I looked for people who were a bit like me, that they didn't have any journalistic experience. And I got lucky because I came across a fantastic guy called Charles Skinner, who was editor of Management Today magazine, and I just bumped into him, and he said, "I'm the editor of Management Today," and I said, "Oh, so how did you get into that?" And he went, "Well, I never meant to. I was, he'd actually been an investor. He worked at 3i, the investment business, and he'd worked like that. And then he had decided that, in much the way I was doing, he had decided to sort of sort of shimmy his way into sort of journalism because he wanted to find out all about how to lead and manage people. That's why, and he kind of knew one or two people that would sort of help him sort of get. Anyway, he managed to get that. He couldn't. He would cheerfully admit that he couldn't write. He was an editor of a magazine and things like that. But he was a great delegator and gave people confidence. And he said, "Well, why don't you come along, for an interview?" And so I went along, and he kind of almost hired me because I didn't have the right experience, because I think he had a whole load of people on his team who were people who had wanted to be journalists since the day they were born. And so that was one thing. So trade on the advantages that you have, even if they don't seem like advantages. And so I found somebody who was a bit like me. The other thing was that once I got a little toe in the door of journalism, I thought, well, what are my strengths? And my strengths were in numbers at that point. And so I'd done all the econometric work. So whenever a survey came into the magazine office that we had to write up, I always ran towards the surveys, and every other arts-based journalist graduate ran away from the surveys because they were frightened of the numbers, and I loved the numbers.
Right.
And so I said, I'll do this, and everyone would say, thank God he's doing that. And so I would write up these reports, so it's slightly technocratic kind of write-ups, but that's how I got my confidence as a journalist. So I'd say you may not think you have strengths going into journalism, but you'll be surprised that sometimes you play on the strengths that you do have. It could be a subject like economics, or it could be a thing like your numerate, or it could be just think a little bit tangentially about how you get in there. There is a little bit of luck and fairy dust involved in that as well, but if you knock on enough doors, you will find your luck eventually.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And I guess things like LinkedIn are going to be helpful in that as well, aren't they? Because you can track people's careers. So yeah.
Well, that was the key, and I wish I'd had LinkedIn at that point, because I think it probably would have accelerated the search quite a lot.
Yeah. So Alison saying playing to your strengths is key in so many ways. So yes, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, so we are pretty much out of time now, but let's just quickly talk about what's next for you in your work, Trevor. What have you got on at the moment? What you're looking to do?
Right. Okay.
Big question.
well, I've taken. I've now got real live employees, who work for me, which is great. So we are in a sort of expansion sort of phase of the business. What I'm looking to do is in my content work, I think I'm looking to develop partnerships with people who either do similar things to what I'm doing, because sometimes you get a project that's bigger than yourself, and so I need to get better at sort of working and bringing in people on teams, and it's a big thing when you're doing anything to admit that there are people who might do it as well as you do, and probably secretly do it better than you do, and to be able to bring in those people. So that's going to fuel the expansion of the business over the next few years. And also in analogous fields that I do PR, and I think I do it quite well, but actually I'm probably going to bring in people to help me and support me on that side of things as well. And then I obviously want to develop the business and maybe put a bit more infrastructure within the business, to make sure that all the bits that I don't enjoy doing get done nonetheless. So I think we're in a bit of a growth phase at the moment.
Excellent. That all sounds really good. So I'm just going to put your LinkedIn page up. So is that the best way for people to contact you if they want to connect with you, Trevor?
Absolutely, 100% LinkedIn. I think I found that is by far and away the best way that I get business, but also I just get chatty on LinkedIn, to be honest. And I found that's often the best way to get business, just network and so on. Obviously, I still love face-to-face networking, but I think that's definitely the best way for people to get in touch in the first instance.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so thank you again, Trevor, for coming on. It's been really interesting. Thank you to everyone watching now or later. And as I said, if you've got any questions that you want to put up later, then I'm sure we can pop back and answer them later on. So next week, I am back with Amanda Kirby. So she's currently working in digital transformation at Thames Water and has got lots and lots of varied IT experience. So I've said here she's one of the best networkers I know. So I've known her for about 17 years now. And she highly impressed me in the playground at school, actually, by coming up with a spreadsheet of all of the parents on there pretty much day one, which was great, and it really was really helpful. So thank you again, and I've just put the wrong slide up there. So thanks for watching, and I'm going to remove that banner. So thanks again, and I'll see you next week.